I'm going to make a start. Obviously, we'll do a little bit of an introduction. People might still be grabbing coffee. I know those cookies are pretty good, so we'll give... over the next few minutes, might get a couple more people dragging in, but hopefully they won't miss too much. So first of all, welcome to my session. My name is Brett Lonsdale. I work for the company that's giving away the beer vouchers. That's Lightning Tools. So I'm here really as an exhibitor and also a speaker. What I'm going to be presenting on is building a business data dashboard using business connectivity services, which those two things don't often go together in people's minds. Business connectivity services is usually something separate to building dashboards, but hopefully what we can offer is a good idea as to if you are using business connectivity services already for things outside of building dashboards, then you could use the same technology without having to learn something new like Power Pivot or Performance Point and still build quite a useful business data dashboard using some of the out-of-the-box or mostly out-of-the-box web parts provided by SharePoint. So I've always been in this kind of space with business connectivity services. A little bit of my SharePoint background. It was actually Steve Smith who is hosting this conference. I used to work with Steve for a company called Expertise Training in Hinckley in Leicestershire, and we worked there together for about 5 or 6 years, and then decided that we were going to form Combined Knowledge over a barbecue. And it was one of those we'd had a few beers and came up with the idea of forming this training company, and we did it. The three of us, Steve Smith, Craig Carpenter, and myself. And that was when I started to get into SharePoint. So Combined Knowledge was not always going to be a SharePoint company. And then since then, I've always kind of specialized in, since 2007 when the Business Data Catalog came out, I've always been in that space. So I helped write the developer's guide to the Business Data Catalog. That was with Todd Bleeker, who's also presenting here at the conference, and also the Business Connectivity Services MS Press book as well. Some of you might have just been in Penny's session. She was one of the co-authors with me on this book, and she'll be signing copies along with me tomorrow. That's at our booth, the Lightning Tools booth. So besides that, I'm a co-host of the SharePoint Pod Show. Does anybody listen to the SharePoint Pod Show? No? Okay. There's actually a surprising amount of people that do listen to it, and all four of the hosts are here. So we have Rob Foster, he's a SharePoint MVP, Nick Swan, Jeremy Thake, and myself are all here this week. And what we tend to do is we do a lot of recordings with people from Microsoft or other Microsoft MVPs on a specific subject that they specialize in, and that's available for download from SharePointPodshow.com. So there's about 70 different episodes there that you can download. So leads on to what we're going to do today. So we're going to have a quick introduction to business connectivity services. I was going to gauge how long I spend on that based upon the number of people that raised their hand. So there was just a few of you that have seen BCS before. So quite quickly, we're just going to do a quick tour as to what business connectivity services does offer out of the box. And then we're going to have a look at building dashboards in SharePoint in general. So not necessarily using BCS, but what technologies can we use to build a dashboard in SharePoint. And then we're going to focus on building a dashboard with the business data web parts in SharePoint. So there's quite a few web parts that come out of the box with the browser. And we're also going to take a look at the data view web part from SharePoint Designer as well, and how that can be used to customize the look and feel of your business data web parts. There's other web parts as well, like the Visio web access web part, Microsoft Chart web part, and so on, that can also be used for business connectivity services. And then finally, we're going to have a look at something called an external list, which is the list type that allows us to create, update, and delete data via BCS. Okay. That's Rob Foster from the SharePoint Pod Show. I recognize that voice. I didn't pay her to do that, by the way. So, quick intro to BCS. So Business Connectivity Services, it basically provides us with a ability to go and connect to external data sources, really no matter where they are. We can connect to all different types of external data sources as well. Not just Microsoft SQL. A lot of people believe that it's just Microsoft SQL because they open up SharePoint Designer, and SharePoint Designer gives you the ability to connect to Microsoft SQL or a .NET Assembly or a WCF web service. So there's people that try to use BCS and straight away they're confused with, well, how do I go and connect to my Oracle database, or how do I go and connect to SAP or Siebel or something like that, or even MySQL. So you can do it. SharePoint Designer is not the only tool. You can use Visual Studio, or there's third-party tools, and I won't go into that. But there's SharePoint Designer or Visual Studio where you can create connections to external data sources. Now, once you've got the connection, there's a whole bunch of things that you can do with it. It's not just about displaying data in a web part. Again, that's a misconception. So people believe that, well, we can, use BCS, get a nice little view going on of my customers or whatever, and I can put that on a page, big deal. We've always been able to do that even since SharePoint 2003 with the data view web part that we're going to be taking a look at. So what BCS provides us with, first of all, we've got something called an external list. So the external list just looks and behaves like another SharePoint list. So if you take a task list or a contacts list or something like that, you've got the ability to create views and filters and sort, create items, edit items, delete items, that sort of thing, set permissions on the list. You can do all of that here with external data. And it's seamless to the end user. So we can create an external list of maybe customers or products or something like that that's actually data coming from our Oracle backend database. And they can treat it as though it's just usual data or a usual list. There are a bunch of things that you can't do, and that's because the data itself does not reside inside SharePoint. So SharePoint's often unaware of changes that have taken place with the data. So for example, if somebody changes the price of a product inside the backend database, SharePoint doesn't know that somebody's just changed that record. It will reflect the changes, but all it's doing is presenting that data inside the list. So you can't build a workflow. There's no events and so on that you can create inside an external list. So these are things that you can do ordinarily, but you won't be able to do with an external list. That has been addressed in 2013, but not here in 2010. There's also search. So you can open up a search site. It doesn't matter what type of search you use. You can search the external data as well. So you've got the ability, when you create your connection to the external data source, you can create what's known as a profile page. And that profile page has a single business data web part on it that displays a row of data in a column format. So it's just a web part that takes the identifier of the row that you want to look at, so like a customer ID or a product ID. So when you click on the search result, it will open up the profile page and show you that row of data. So if you take something with quite a complicated UI, maybe SAP, something like that, and you've got senior management in your organization, perhaps getting close to retirement or something, and they don't want to learn this brand new SAP installation that we've got. All they want to be able to do is just occasionally go and search on a piece of data and find it. They'd be able to do that using SharePoint and BCS. You also have the external business data field type. So how many of you have created site columns before, or custom columns? Yeah, everybody. So you can create date time columns, rich text columns, currency columns, that sort of thing. Well, also, we've got the external business data field type, which allows us to look up data from an external data source. So if we're creating something like a proposal for a customer inside Word, and we want to save that back to a document library, we might want to track, well, who's the customer for this proposal? So rather than having somebody type in, a business user typing in the customer name, where you might get lots of different versions of the same customer, they might type in BP or British Petroleum or BP PLC, that sort of thing. You can actually go and look up the customer that might be coming from your back-end relationship database and store the data then inside the list itself. So that provides you with an external lookup to the data source. There's also a suite of web parts. So we've got a whole bunch of business data web parts that can all present the data in different ways. User profiles is something else that it provides us with. So if you take audience targeting and all these wonderful things that we can do inside SharePoint, audience targeting is really only as good as the user's profile inside SharePoint. So if they've filled out their profile correctly, then that means we can target information to them better because we know what skills they have and what department they work in, what office they're based at, that kind of idea. So it might be that we've already got a database like a human resources database that we could connect to via BCS and pull in that information into the user's profile. Okay, so there's ways of connecting to external systems for that as well. It doesn't stop there. In the client, in Office 2010, we have SharePoint Workspace. So that's a way of taking data offline. So you can take all the lists and libraries offline and open them on your client. And that includes the external list. So you can take business data offline. InfoPath is also BCS aware. So is Word and Outlook. So all of this data can be used within the client. What makes that happen is you've got a BDC client runtime, and there's also a server runtime as well. So, the moment that you connect to an external list and you take something offline into Outlook or whatever, there's part of Office that is BCS aware. Okay. So, with that in mind, let's have a look at some of those things. So I'm just going to navigate back up to BCS here. So here's a couple of the web parts with not a great deal done to them. Obviously, I'm running a high resolution, so you can see it. So this is a business data list web part. What you'll notice is we've just got a whole bunch of data displayed in here with some pagination going on. And you can do things like sorting by clicking on the column headers and straightforward things like that. Now, if I go and edit the page, just having to scroll around a little bit, I can go and edit the web part. And once I'm editing the web part, I then get this edit view. And using the edit view, I can very quickly and easily change which columns I'm seeing inside my web part. So it's a quick and easy web part just to add on the page, and using the browser, you can customize the look and feel of it, customize the filters, and that kind of thing. So we're now getting a lot less data back than we were before. They can also be connected to other web parts. So you'll notice here that I've got this little icon just to the left, and clicking on one of these icons basically fires a connection to another web part on the page, and that's called the business data related list web part. So when we choose a customer, we're effectively seeing all of the orders that that customer has made as well. Okay, so they're just a couple of the web parts that come out of the box with business connectivity services, and those web parts can be customized in SharePoint Designer. If we were to go and edit, again, one of these web parts, you'll notice on the right-hand side here that if we expand the miscellaneous section, we've got the data view caching. This is effectively a data view web part that comes from SharePoint Designer. So you can completely manipulate this in SharePoint Designer. And it might be you want to do some conditional formatting, or you want to use some nice colors and things like that inside the web part. But you'll also notice that there's other formatting you might want to do as well, like these dates and times, for example. Do we really need to know the time that somebody ordered when most of them are set to 12 a.m. anyway? So we could come in and format that to a short date, or just something as simple as that, or even take the freight costs and format that to currency rather than showing multiple decimal places, that kind of thing. So all of that can be done easily using SharePoint Designer, which can't be done using the browser. So that's the web parts. Now we've also got an external list here. So again, looks and behaves just like a standard SharePoint list. We've got the list ribbon at the top. So you can build views. You can synchronize it to a SharePoint workspace. You can modify the view, etc. You've also got the ability to go in and create new items. So when I go to create a new item, that presents me with a dialog box where I can create a new list item, but essentially it's not creating a list item, it's writing straight back to the external data source. Okay. And you can control all of the permissions on that as well. Notice some of these are highlighted as with validation rules, so they can't be blank. Business Connectivity Services also picks that up when you connect to a table view or a stored procedure and recognizes what validation rules are there and reflects them when you go to create a new item. So you can create items, you can edit items, delete items, etc., all using a list. We've also got the external data column that I mentioned. So here inside a document library, this is called proposals. And if we were creating a new proposal, so let's go through and create a new document. So here inside the brand new document, one of the things we can do is insert what's known as a quick part. So I can come down to the document property, and this shows all of the custom columns that I've got within inside that library. In fact, all of the columns inside that library, not just custom columns. So I could choose something like customer and drop that onto the page, and also put some other quick parts on, such as the city, country, etc. And we'll just make it look a bit like a document so we can create our letter. And when we go to fill this in, we can actually look up from the external data source from within the client as well. So this is the BDC runtime working on the client. So we can simply choose a customer. This is live coming from the back-end data source, and it fills in the rest of the fields for me. Not just within the document, but also when I save that document, that becomes metadata as well inside the document there. So you can see some other examples of this here. So if I was to go and edit the properties of one of these previously created documents, you can see I've not just got customer, but I've also got products as well. So we can go and select from the list of products coming from the back-end database, and this is all coming from a SQL database. Okay, so saving that then stores the metadata here. Now, that also has the ability to refresh it, so we can, that stores a snapshot of the data at that point in time, so it is stored along the library, unlike the external list that is linking, but you can refresh that and it will refresh all the data back to the data source again. Okay, so there's just a few things that we mentioned in the slides that you have now seen you can use inside SharePoint. So BCS is way more than just, like I say, displaying data within inside a web part. The one thing I didn't show you was the search, so that's quite a powerful aspect. So let me just come down to my search site. So notice that I've built a few tabs along the top. So by default, you get the All Sites and People tab. So we can search for somebody like Alfred's Futterkist. And I just remember that because I've been working with the Northwind database for a long, long time. Ever since the Sir Rodney's Marmalade was $60. It's been $80 for quite some time now. But so searching on Alfred's Futterkist, you can see that that's brought me back this row of data that doesn't actually belong inside SharePoint. It's coming from a SQL database backend. We can click onto that item, and that's the profile page. And again, this web part can be customized in SharePoint Designer, and you can also add other web parts to this page. So it would be possible to take this one customer, add below it the business data related list web part, and relate the two web parts using web part connections so that it doesn't just display the customer, but then also shows the orders for that customer once you've searched on that customer and so on. So again, that could be done using just by editing that page. Okay, so dashboards. So if we compare this first of all with an everyday dashboard, a lot of companies Might have a very simple dashboard, just like what we used to have within a car. Might tell us how much fuel's in our petrol tank, what sort of speed we're doing, but doesn't tell us a lot else. Whereas if we compare that to a new modern day car, you've got all sorts of information going on, especially in a Mercedes S-Class. But you can see like the distance between you and the car in front and all of that sort of thing. So you're overwhelmed with this really useful information within the dashboard. And we can do the same sort of thing within SharePoint as well. So building dashboards in SharePoint, there's lots of web parts and technologies that we can use besides business connectivity services, and we'll go through some of those in just a moment. But this gives you an idea of the sort of thing that you can build. So we have web part connections here. So we've got filter web parts where we could select, say, a year, and once we select that year, then that passes through a web part connection to other web parts on the page and shows us relevant data. So here we've got, this is actually using Power Pivot through Excel Web Access. So we can see some KPI indicators on how well we've been performing per product or product category. And you could expand each of those different product categories to see individual products and how well they're performing as well. There's also some KPI details here. So that's, again, using a web part connection. So once we select a value, then it's going to concentrate on that particular item. So in this case, cell phones. And then we've got channel sales, so we can see where all our sales are coming from and what region those sales are coming from as well. So we don't have to go in to perhaps Dynamics CRM or SAP to learn how well our company's performing. We could send our managers or whoever needs to know this information to this page, and they can get a good snapshot on how well the business is performing. They don't see any red icons, so they know everything is going quite well. Okay. So dashboards in SharePoint can be made up of all sorts of things. You can create what's known as a report library, and those report libraries allow you to create a report. And a report is essentially just a web part page. You could do the same thing using a SharePoint team site if you wanted to. It just lives inside a library, a special library called a report library. And that report library, when you create it, it prompts you for certain web parts already to be added to the page, so like the KPI list and the KPI web part. But what you will get is an Excel Web Access web part. So how many of you have played around with Excel Web Access? A few, okay. So you've got Excel services, and part of Excel services means that you can view an Excel workbook that might be stored inside a library through the browser. You can create a named range from that workbook and present it inside a single web part. So this could be a table, or it could be a chart. It could be part of a table that's using Power Pivot, and display that inside this one web part that, again, can be connected to others. You also have the status indicator list. So the status indicator list allows you to build certain conditions. So that can be built on a number of different things, another SharePoint list, an Excel workbook, SQL reporting services, and so on. And you can configure conditions. So it might be that, is the revenue for last year greater than our target for last year? If it is, then display the green icon. So something as simple as that. So you can build multiple status indicators within a list that are all your conditions, and that shows you the detail of them. And then the KPI web part itself can be connected to a status indicator list, and that would show good summary information of what's going on inside that status indicator, allowing you to drill down. So there's those web parts. There's also Performance Point, Power View, Power Pivot are all other technologies that you can use to build a dashboard. Now, like I mentioned earlier, we're not looking to replace these, because you could actually build a much more powerful dashboard using these technologies than you could do with business connectivity services. But my point is that you've got business connectivity services perhaps configured anyway in order to take this data from your external systems and display in SharePoint. So you could also use the same technology to build out your dashboard without having to learn something like Performance Point, which isn't that straightforward to learn. So there's other web parts as well that we mentioned, the business data web parts. We've also got chart web parts and gauges that can also be used to make up your dashboard. Okay, so we kind of mentioned a lot of this already, so why BCS? So the business data web parts, you have the business data list. So very straightforward. Add it onto the page. It is essentially a data view web part. You can customize it in SharePoint Designer, and that's exactly what I'll do in just a moment. One of the things that we might want to do with that is show some conditional formatting. So I'm just going to jump to a previous page. Probably easier to navigate to it. Okay, so on this page, what we're going to add is a business data web part. So here under the business data category, not all of these web parts are business connectivity services related. They're just business data related. One of them here is the business data list web part. So I'm just going to simply add that onto the page here and open up the tool pane. And what we can do is connect to something called an external content type. So the external content type is basically an object containing all of the methods determining the behavior of what we can do with that data. So, for example, we have something called a finder method that returns all the rows and all the columns from your data, and that's its job. You've got a specific finder that returns just a single row. You have to give it an identifier, but it will then return you a row of data. And then we've got things like the creator, updater, and deleter methods if we want to use an external list and be able to manipulate that data. So they all live in these things called external content types, and I'll show you how to create one of those shortly. And here's a whole bunch that I've already got configured. And you can see here, these are configured for the Northwind database. So I might want to go for something like products, select that, and choose OK. Notice that you can also build multiple finder methods as well. So those finder methods will be displayed as a view. So I could have a summary view as well if I wanted to. I don't have to have all of the columns available to me. So once I OK that, I get the web part onto the page. And again, you can see things like the unit price isn't formatted, that kind of idea. So what I'm going to do, first of all, is just trim the number of columns that we've got displayed here. And then we're going to take this into SharePoint Designer and customize it a little bit using some conditional formatting. So I'll edit the view and get rid of some of this information that we don't really care about. And click OK. Okay, so we've now got our data view web part. And from the Site Actions menu, we can now edit that inside SharePoint Designer. Okay, and sometimes it does this for me. It displays what the page did look like. Let's just try and refresh that. This is SharePoint Designer at its best. Just bear with me. There we go. So we've now got our products list web part. Now notice it gives us some summary data. This isn't actually our data. It's just an example of what data would look like in this web part. But we know that our unit price is not formatted to 2 decimal places. So that's one of the things that we might want to do. So if we just take a quick look back, we can see that that's got 4 decimal places. It's not showing the currency symbol and so on. So you can come in here and manipulate that. So simply by highlighting that data, we can come down to this format section, choose currency, select our symbol, click OK, and we'll save that. And as we refresh the page, you might have to refresh a couple of times depending on how quickly it's written back to the database, but you can see that that's now formatted to your 2 decimal places with a currency symbol, etc. So it's very easy to go in and manipulate the cell itself. You can also do a bit of calculations in here as well. You can go and insert a formula. So we could say, well, I want to take the unit price, but I want to times that by 1.2, which means that we're also adding on the VAT. So it allows me to do that as well, so we can calculate data inside here. And next, what I'm going to do is highlight a row. It doesn't matter which row I'm going to highlight, as long as I highlight a row. So once I've got a row highlighted, I can come in and apply some conditional formatting. So notice you can hide content as well as apply different formatting. So this is how we can get the KPIs working. In the status list web part, I mentioned the different data sources that you could connect to, and BCS wasn't one of them. So if you did have an Oracle database and you wanted to show some KPIs, you wouldn't be able to do it using the standard status list. So what you can do is insert the traffic light indicators into the web part. You just insert the images and then hide them using conditional formatting based upon the condition. So you can build your condition within this. I'll show you how that's done in just a moment. So what I'm going to do first of all is apply some formatting. And we get to build our rule. So I'm going to go for the units in stock, and if the units in stock is less than 5, then we want to go and set our style. So very straightforward. We'll change the background color. I'll try and be tasteful with this. Sometimes you can get things like green on red and things like that, but let's just take our time with it and make it look a bit more pleasant. So I've applied that to a single row, and we can save the changes. And hopefully when we refresh this now, we can see the conditional formatting applied. It wasn't quite the color that I chose, but there we go. I don't know what happened to the red foreground, but you can see the conditional formatting applied. So these products are actually out of stock, and they're being highlighted there. Okay, so Blue Peter version is over here on the right-hand side. This is doing a similar thing. As I mentioned, you could go and insert some traffic light indicators and show and hide them based upon a certain condition using the same conditional formatting. So if I was to go and edit this page in SharePoint Designer, which I should already have open, over on the right-hand side here, you can see this image has basically been inserted. I've not inserted a different one for each row. It's literally just both images have been inserted into that row. And then there's the conditions at the bottom here that hide the content based upon a certain cell's value. Okay, so you can build those KPIs quite easily using that. We've also got another example where we've customized the business data list web part. And with that, you can build aggregate functions and set grouping. So once again, if we come in here, the data view web part has all of these tools available, and you've got the ability to sort, filter, group, apply the conditional formatting, insert formulas, all of that sort of thing as well. So under sort and group, this particular one is grouped by company name. And if we click onto the advanced grouping, you can see how you can quite easily just tick a checkbox that says show the column totals per group as well. So the outcome of that is over here. So we're grouping by company name. So rather than just seeing a great big list of customers, this is calling a stored procedure that's actually giving me the sales totals per customer. And rather than just showing it in a grid, we can expand the data and see all the orders that each customer's ever made, and then the total spend of that particular customer. So that could be employees. You could see all of the performance of each of your salespeople if you wanted to, or sales per region, that kind of thing, and have it grouped by the region, grouped by the city, or whatever. Yeah.
In SharePoint Designer, you were just selecting one cell, applying the logic, and it actually just
Yep, exactly that. Yep. Yep. So, yeah, we can do that from scratch very quickly. So if I just go and add the web part again. So it's the business data list web part. And what I'm going to do is open the tool pane and choose an external content type. So instead of just connecting to a table of information like we did before with the products, you can see here I'm calling a couple of stored procedures. So I've got sales totals by amount. So that's actually a stored procedure in the back-end database that I can connect to. So a lot of the work is done there in actually finding what orders each customer's made. So we can connect to that. If you don't like using SharePoint Designer, you've also got the XSL editor here as well, so you can do things manually with that. So this is how the data comes across by default. So we just get a simple grid of information. So now we want to make it look a little bit nicer. So I'll save and close the page, refresh that inside SharePoint Designer. Hopefully it won't blue screen or anything because I am in SharePoint Designer. It's always a risk. It's gone. Yeah. The design view has gone in 2013, which is something you obviously need to be aware of as well. But the good thing is that Laura Rogers posted. She's made a career out of the data view web part. Yeah, you can use SharePoint Designer 2010 with this. There's a bit of a registry hack in order to do it, but you can do it, and she's posted about that. And also everything will upgrade as well. So. Okay, so there's the business data list that we just configured, and we saw that was just a grid. So I can just click anywhere in the web part. It doesn't matter where I am, as long as the web part's selected. Go to sort and group. So there's company name. Sorry, I couldn't see it for looking at the top. So send across company name as the column that I want to group on, and you can group by multiple columns as well if you wanted to. And then we can show a group footer, and then under the advanced grouping, just simply show the totals per group. So we can OK all of that, and that gives you, again, an example of what it's going to look like with sample data. Now, I don't need to add up all the order IDs. That's not going to be useful to me whatsoever. So you can obviously manually come in and reconfigure this as well. What might be useful is we do a count of them instead. So we can see how many orders they've made. Now, if I... Again, you know what SharePoint Designer's like. Click this in the right way. Let me go and do this manually. So what you could do is do a count or something like that instead. So we can come down and have a look at all of our different functions. So there's our count. Try that one more time. Okay, so we've got a count, and then I can choose the order ID. And it gives you a sample at the bottom as well, so you can see if you're getting a not as null error or something along those lines. And then we can just change. Oh, I've now clicked it in the right way, and there's my little bolt of lightning, which would allow me to have done that a little bit more simple. But okay, so if we save this now, and refresh it, we should go away from our grid of data, and you can see, oh, not quite got what I was after, but You can see we've got something towards it. So there's our sum. And again, these need formatting as a currency and what have you, but you saw how we could do that as well. Okay. So with a data view web part, you can completely change the way that these business data list web parts are working. Okay, there's the related list as well. So with that, you need to have built what's known as an association between your two external content types. So you can do this with SharePoint Designer. We'll show you right at the very end when you create a external content type. You'll build all of your methods, as I mentioned, so your creator, updater, deleter, get list, etc. And then you can build an association to another external content type and basically recreate your database relationship. So you're building a connection from your identifier to primary key to foreign key, effectively. Okay, so we had a look at the business data web parts. Other web parts you've got are, one of them is the chart web part. So this is again something that can be used very quickly from within the browser. It does take some fiddling, but you can get there in the end. If we go to insert another new web part again, under the business data section, there's the chart web part. So we can add that onto the page. It gives you a sample again, and we've got the data and appearance link there. And we then go and connect our chart to some data. Notice it's still using the old terminology from SharePoint 2007 of the business data catalog, but that's basically business connectivity services. So we can select that. You can connect to Excel services and everything else as well, or get data from another web part, and that includes the business data web part. So you could just get the data from linking instead. So it's asking me for my external content type. So we use the same sales totals by amount. It shows us our sample data, which you can then filter if you want to. And then we can set simply our X and Y coordinates. So we've got the company name and the sale amount. Okay, and when we hit finish, we then get our data displayed in a chart there. So it's very straightforward indeed. And if you want to then go and change it for a pie chart or whatever you want to do, you can go through and customize your chart. So it gives you all sorts of different types of charts that you can customize here. And this is all out of the box stuff. So if you want 3D charts even, they have them. Although it's a bit out of fashion now. Everything's about tiles. So, but you could obviously choose one of those instead. And you can also go through and customize all of your colors and what have you. So there's a whole bunch of different colors that you could select and customize individually in order to get it to look nice on your dashboard. Okay, so once again, once you've already got your connection there, it's very quick and easy in order to build that sort of thing. Something else we kind of touched on earlier is also using Visio. So Visio, you can connect to business connectivity services as well. It's business connectivity services aware, and you can use that to build gauges. So if you've built a gauge using BCS, you can obviously save that Visio diagram, publish it using Visio Web Access, and using a Visio Web Access web part, you can then go and display that gauge. So that's something else that you could do in order to build a dashboard on a page as well. The Excel Web Access we mentioned. Excel in SharePoint 2010 isn't BCS aware. So yeah, you can't connect Excel at all to business connectivity services. You can in 2013. So from the external list, you can just simply click a button that opens up that BCS data as a link inside an Excel workbook, and then that could be published via Excel Web Access. That said, it's not that difficult to do. It's one of the things that was touched on in our book, that you can use Visual Studio tools for Office, create yourself a nice little ribbon button or something like that, that when you click on it, it goes and connects to an external content type and pulls in the data into an Excel workbook. So it could be done, and there's examples of that. Another web part is the list view web part. So don't forget that we've got the external lists. So those external lists give us that CRUD functionality with the back-end data. So once we've connected to a data source, we've got it all published inside an external list, we could add that external list as a web part on the page and then still customize it. So not only are you presenting data on your dashboard, but you could also then empower users to be able to create new items via that web part and update or delete the items as well. So that would be fairly straightforward to do. So we had a look at the external list already. Creating one is very straightforward. So here inside my site, I can come down to View All Site Content, click Create, and in here you've got the external list type. So if I wanted to call this, let's go with products again, choose my products external content type. So I'm going to move down here to products from the Northwind database. Hit create, and I've now already got this list. Now, just as a bit of a tip, one of the things you can do with nearly all of the other lists inside SharePoint is customize the form that they use in InfoPath. So you can click onto the list ribbon, you've got a nice customized form button that will open up that list in InfoPath, and you could then customize the way the form works, add some validation or conditional formatting, that sort of thing inside your form. If you tried to do that in an external list, that's one of the things that it would lead you to believe is not possible. So the button isn't there, first of all, but if we go to the list settings, there's also a form settings link, and when we click it, it actually tells you that InfoPath does not support customizing the form used for this list. Okay, so it suggests that you can't do it. However, if we use SharePoint Designer, you can. We can go up to lists and libraries, assuming this is the right site. Let me just see if I can get that to refresh somehow. There we go. So there's my products external list in SharePoint Designer. I'm not going to use SharePoint Designer to make the customizations. I'm going to use it to click that same button that you had in SharePoint for all the other lists. So we can just simply come in here and edit the forms using InfoPath for my external list and publish the changes right back to the external list itself. So yeah, the button just doesn't show in the UI, but it is there if you use SharePoint Designer as a stepping stone. So all we're using there is SharePoint Designer to click the button. That's it. But once we've got in here, notice, I mean, even down to the column naming, you might want to put some spaces in there just to make it look a bit nicer. And in here, you could use a bit of styling. So we can use some of the built-in styles or customize it ourselves. You can also insert some of the validation controls. So from the, wherever it is, we've got a list of controls somewhere. Thank you. There we go. So there's a whole bunch of controls here. So we could change the controls that we're using for different controls, or also put in some of the validation controls which are in there somewhere. And there's also a separate control that is BCS aware, the external item picker. So that external item picker is similar to the quick part that I used in Word, where it looked up the data from the backend system. So if you're filling out an InfoPath form, you could also look up from external data as well in order to help your users fill out those forms. But yeah, we can customize this and publish our changes back just using a quick publish. So now if I go to edit an item, we can see how that styling has taken place, and we've managed to customize the form itself. Okay, so they're quite useful. Now, connecting in the first place. Sure, go.
Is the button still disabled if they publish the InfoPath form?
Yeah, you still need to click it from within SharePoint Designer. Yeah. Absolutely. So connecting to the external data in the first place, how difficult is that? Well, what I'm going to do is just show you how to connect to SQL using SharePoint Designer. But bear in mind, you can also connect to other data sources as well. It might just need a bit more effort, building a .NET assembly or a WCF web service. So from within SharePoint Designer, we've got content types, and then we've got external content types. So we select the external content types, hit new content type, and we get to give this a name. So, yeah, once again, I'm just going to call this sales revenue. And at the bottom here, we can create our connection. Now, it's already got our connection remembered from the last time. So I'm just going to remove that connection so you can see how to add it. So I'll add the connection, and this is what we can connect to. So you've got SQL Server, WCF web service, or a .NET type. Now the .NET type and the WCF service have to be created in Visual Studio, but essentially there are tools that will help you with that as well. I'm going to connect to SQL Server, just using my local SQL Server, connecting to the Northwind database, and I'm going to use integrated authentication, which probably won't work in your production environment. The reason why that won't is because of the double hop issue, as I'm using NTLM, and it will work in this environment because SQL is local to my SharePoint server. So there's my Northwind database. I can expand the tables section, and notice that we've also got views and all the rest of it. And all we do is simply right-click what it is we want to connect to, and then we can create these operations. So we've got the read item operation, which is that specific finder I mentioned, where it passes through an ID and then brings you back a row. And then we've got the read list, which is the finder method. And then we've got the creator, updater, deleter, and also the association if you wanted to use the related list web part and join the two together. So I'm going to go and create all of them. And I've had this before. Let's just, okay, so that error is because when I went to create the connection, okay, I have already got a connection established where I didn't use the full stop for my database server. So it complains about that. You've got to be consistent. Hopefully, oops, this will now work. There we go. So we're creating all the operations. So I'm going to create the create, read, update, delete, and the read list. As I go through, these are the columns that I've got available. Notice this one's marked as a identifier, so like a primary key. And what we can do for the other ones is set some display properties. We can show in the picker. The picker is that dialog box that shows you all the data, so you can choose whether or not you want to show this column in that picker or not. You can also map to an Office property. So if you've said that this is like a contact type, when you take it into Outlook, you can display all of the data inside the contacts folder and so on. And also have a timestamp field, so that's for the search index. So if you had a field that was modified every single time you updated that row, like in Dynamic CRM, it might record the last time you changed a customer or something, you can map that as a timestamp field. So when the search index reindexes, it knows not to bother with that field if it hasn't changed recently, and so on. So that speeds up your indexing. We can also create filters in here as well if we want to, but otherwise we just hit finish and then hit save. And that writes this back to a database called the metadata store. So that's now saved back, and what we should be able to do is now go through and create our external list. So fairly straightforward. If I hit create, choose the external list again. I should have a newly created external content type. Called sales revenue, or something to that effect. I'm sure that's what I did just call it. In fact, it wasn't named by the looks of it. Give me a name. Fred. Okay. So we'll call the list Fred, and hopefully we've got an external content type called Fred. And now you all think I'm pulling the wool over your eyes. Okay, not a problem, because what we can do is also build a list from here. So that should also build it based upon this new external content type for us. So if we go to lists and libraries, we've now got Fred, which is coming from the Fred read list operation. And there we go. So there's our data now inside an external list coming from there as well. Okay, so you can use SharePoint Designer. Visual Studio also has a business data model diagram, so you can build out your external content type using different methods and properties. It creates all the stubs for you, and you have to fill it in with code in order to connect to the external data. But that kind of brings us to an end of that session. So I'm going to open up to any questions that you might have.